My name is Josh Axelbird, and I'm a member here at Rising Church. And I'm here with Jonathan Noa, who is a super member, super volunteer, does a ton of stuff for the church. And he's here to share his story about tithing and giving with us today. Over the last year at Rising Church, we've been talking about tithing, and we believe that God calls us to tithe and that he promises us that blessings will flow when we're faithful in that. And so Jonathan's here to share a story with us. And so, Jonathan, if you would, just kind of tell us when you got started tithing and what led you to that.
Yeah, so I started tithing in my early 20s. I'm 27 now, just to give you some context. And so, I know I look young. So, I don't. So I kind of had this realization when I started working part-time that, hey, I have some money coming in. And so I had this thought that, like, hey, I should start tithing. And so it kind of started as a slow rollout where I was trying to build a habit of tithing. So whenever I remembered every month, I would try to write a check out and make that part of just something that I did every month. It didn't start off that way, but I slowly built that into a habit.
So I think for folks, when they start in their early 20s, they might not have a lot of resources yet, and it can be scary thinking, I don't really have anything yet. How could I possibly start to tithe on a regular basis? Was it difficult to get started in your early 20s?
So I think the hardest part about tithing, especially when you're young, and if you're like me, you were working part-time and you were broke and living with your parents, which I'm not anymore. But thank you. I'm a millennial genius. Anyway, so, but I think the hardest part is getting over this mental barrier that says, I cannot tithe, I cannot afford to tithe, I will tithe when I'm older, I'm married, so on and so forth. And the reality is that this is the easiest time in your life to start tithing. And it's such a weird thing to think about because you think, oh, I have no money. But the reality is that you have really little overhead in your life because your parents are paying for everything. And so what happens is that as you get older, it becomes so much harder when you're paying your own bills, if you're not like me, you have a wife and kids, and you're taking care of all these things in your life. And so if you choose to start tithing later, this is for you high schoolers, if you choose to start tithing later, it will become harder because you're going to have to start making cuts in your life, and that's a lot more painful than if you kind of grow into it and build that habit early on.
So one of the things that was interesting to me as we start talking about your story, your first kind of, I want to say real job, was in ministry. When you started tithing, you were in ministry. And if you were around Rising Church in those days, we were meeting over in the Commons here at North Gwinnett, and sound was really tough. And Jonathan was super essential in our ability to do ministry, but he was probably making in that job not anywhere close to what he would make if he was doing sound in a for-profit environment. And so I was just wondering, as we were talking, was it more difficult to commit to tithing when maybe you were serving and maybe sacrificing a little bit financially to be in ministry? Did that make it more difficult to commit to tithe?
Tithing when you're in ministry, especially when you're broke and in ministry, is kind of a weird thing because when you kind of look at it objectively, you're thinking, okay, so I'm getting paid by an organization with the expectation that I'm going to give money back to that organization. It's like this weird messed up Ponzi scheme or something. But what's crazy is that when you really think about it, what we're doing, whether you're in vocational ministry or not, everybody here is part of this community that we call Rising, and we're trying to build this thing together. And so what's cool is that, and we forget this so often, when you tithe, you're not here to pay bills and pay staff and faculty, even though that's part of it. But what's really cool to me is that when you choose to tithe at a healthy church, which I believe Rising is, your money is actually going towards fulfilling the mission of the global church. And so when you give money to the church, what you're actually doing is investing in high schoolers and elementary schoolers and middle schoolers here in Gwinnett. When you choose to tithe, you're actually helping people in forgotten parts of the world like Haiti, which we got to hear about last week, all the things that we're doing with Young Life. And when you choose to tithe, you are helping people who are ministering in some of the darkest parts of the world, places like the Middle East, where it's dangerous to minister there. And so I think it's important to remember that it doesn't matter if you're on staff at a church or not, if you call yourself a follower of Christ, that is a worthy way to invest your money.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. So, when you think back to you're starting to tithe, what blessings have flown? As we believe Scripture says that God promises that He will open up a flood of blessings. What blessings have you seen in your life from this commitment to tithe?
So, I'm going to say something kind of dumb, but God is smart, and He knows something about ourselves that we don't often recognize, and it's that we were not built to live lives focused on ourselves all the time, 100%. That's just not how we're wired. We cannot be healthy like that. And so so much about God is mysterious and beautiful, but there's something really practical that He does for us. He gives us a system, and it's called the church. It's called the Holy Church. And what this system does is it does a lot of things, but part of it is that it helps us to not focus on ourselves. And we get this in certain ways. We get that having community is a great thing. We get that makes us less self-centered. And so everybody's on board with that. And we get that serving is a good thing. It makes us, once again, less self-centered. It makes us healthier. We're able to flow out. But I've never heard somebody say, oh, the church, all they want is my time and energy and volunteer. Like, people get that volunteering is good and healthy. And yet, we don't look at money the same way. Because when we choose to give our money, what we're doing is we're becoming healthier, we're becoming more generous. And so we're basically able to live more open-handed. And so the blessing that I see from tithing is, I can't promise that if you choose to tithe, like, your bank account's gonna get magically bigger. I just can't. But what I can promise is that if you choose to tithe, you will become a healthier, a more generous person. You'll become more who God created you to be. And that is, once again, such a worthy investment. That's something that's worth putting your money into. Stop buying so many self-help books. Start tithing, put that money there, and watch yourself become a different person.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. It's really been amazing. Thank you for...
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that word with us, and thanks for all your commitment and all the giving you give to God and Rising Church.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.